One June morning in Occitania, France, Amandine Estrabaud, a modest lycée assistant from the small town of Roquecourbe, set off for work as usual. By evening, neighbors had spotted her near her home. The next day, her phone went dark. Her front door was left unlocked. In her garden, something immediately set off alarm bells. What had started as a simple disappearance would soon become one of modern France's most tangled and controversial cases. Amandine was 30 when she vanished. Born and raised in the deep-rooted community of Roquecourbe, population around 2,000, she'd been active in village life since childhood. She joined the local festival committee, making her a familiar face across the town. She was closest with her mother. Their bond was warm, almost like a friendship, and they regularly checked in by phone or in person. She also remained close to her brother, Remy. Locals even nicknamed them the Village Children. After a breakup with her partner, Amandine returned to live in her hometown, though she'd previously shared a place near the Castres train station. Independently minded and engaged with life, she hoped to one day study speech-language pathology, planned to buy a car, and continued seeing her mother after the split. There was nothing to suggest she had willingly gone missing or was suffering a deep personal crisis. On Tuesday, June 18, 2013, Amandine left for work. The day at the lycée in Castres was routine. She worked quietly through the morning, assisting staff, and everything seemed normal. Then, around 1 to 10 p.m., she wrapped up and left the building. Typically, someone would give her a ride back. She had no car, but on that day, no one was available due to urgent matters. With no backup plan, she began a solo trek home, about 8 miles or 13 kilometers, a journey that would take nearly 3 hours on foot. Around 2:15 p.m., Amandine was reportedly seen in the Cantegaline area, near a bus stop just a few miles from her home. This sighting would turn out to be the last officially confirmed moment of her being seen in public. Her route after that point remains unclear, but based on indirect testimony, investigators were able to construct a preliminary idea of what might have happened next. Although there was no surveillance footage or other hard evidence, a neighbor named Corinne helped piece together a key part of the timeline. Corinne lived nearby and had a clear view of Amandine's front door from her home. Around 4 p.m., she noticed a white Renault traffic van parked outside, a vehicle she'd never seen in the neighborhood before. It didn't belong to any locals and stood out as unfamiliar. First, Amandine stepped out of the van. She looked calm, dressed normally, and showed no signs of distress. Corinne noticed she was holding a bag with her knee while searching inside for her house keys. Amandine unlocked the door and went inside. Shortly after, a man exited the vehicle. Corinne couldn't get a good look at his face. She saw him only from behind and at a distance, but she remembered a few details. He was of medium height, around 5 feet 7 inches or 170 centimeters, and had a stocky build. He wore gray work pants with large pockets and orange reflective stripes, the kind commonly seen on uniforms used by construction, road, or utility crews. His face wasn't visible, but his demeanor didn't raise any red flags. He walked calmly and didn't act aggressively. According to Corinne, there was no argument, tension, or even notable emotional exchange between him and Amandine. Their interaction seemed neutral and ordinary. She didn't hear any raised voices or signs of conflict. Her account was taken by investigators and became a central piece of the case. The following day, June 19th, Amandine's mother, Monique Sire, began to worry. The day before, they had planned to meet, something they often did. Their bond was very close, and staying in touch was part of their regular routine. If Amandine couldn't answer a call, she always returned it shortly after. But this time, there was complete silence. Monique tried calling several times that day and into the evening, but got no response. Still, she didn't panic, assuming her daughter was simply busy. But by the next morning, when she still hadn't heard anything, she decided to drive over to Amandine's house. When she arrived, she found the front door was unlocked. That immediately alarmed her. Amandine was always cautious, especially living in a secluded area where strangers were rare. Inside, everything looked as if Amandine had just stepped out for a moment. A jacket hung neatly on a chair. Her everyday bag was in its usual place. Her phone was left out and unattended. The home was quiet. Monique called out, but no one responded. There were no signs of urgent errands or a quick departure. A visual inspection of the home's interior revealed no signs of disorder. Everything was in its place. No forced entry, no furniture displaced, no items thrown around. Yet Monique couldn't shake the sense that something was deeply wrong. Amandine had always been methodical and predictable, especially in recent years. She never left her phone unattended, didn't go anywhere without informing someone, and never forgot to lock her front door. These inconsistencies convinced Monique that she needed to contact the authorities. She reached out to the local gendarmerie in Roque-Corbeil. Officers arrived and conducted a preliminary assessment. Inside, they confirmed what Monique had already observed. No signs of a struggle, no indication of forced entry, and nothing suggesting an uninvited presence. Everything pointed to someone leaving the home calmly and without resistance. But once the officers stepped outside, their findings took a more concerning turn. Out back, through a sliding glass door, was a garden area. Despite the yard's generally overgrown state, one patch of grass immediately stood out. It was a rectangular area, roughly 11.5 by 5 feet, around 3.5 by 1.5 meters, where the grass appeared significantly flattened. The ground was level and the vegetation compressed, as if something or someone had stayed there for an extended time or experienced some kind of physical force. It was a site that could suggest either a confrontation or a prolonged presence in that spot. Close to this area, personal items belonging to Amandine were found. Among them were a pair of lightweight flats shoes Monique confirmed Amandine had worn the day before, and 2 earrings. The clasps on the earrings were damaged, which could indicate they were removed abruptly, possibly during physical contact. These discoveries were the first pieces of physical evidence pointing to the likelihood that something unexpected had taken place outside the home. Although no additional evidence was found that day, what had been uncovered gave investigators enough cause to classify the case as a disappearance under concerning circumstances. An official investigation was launched. Officers began questioning neighbors and working to build a timeline of Amandine's final known movements. By June 19th, the investigation had several red flags. Amandine had vanished without taking any of her belongings. There were no signs of intrusion at the house, and physical evidence in the yard suggested possible signs of distress. The case quickly moved into its active phase. The first step was to review any available surveillance footage, though cameras were few and far between in the area. Authorities also canvassed potential routes Amandine could have taken on June 18th, prioritizing anyone who might have seen her that day. Despite efforts, no new sightings surfaced beyond what had already been documented. Soon, missing person bulletins were issued. Amandine was described as approximately 5 feet 5 inches, or 1.65 meters tall, with long, dark hair. On the day she vanished, she was wearing a brown skirt that fell above the knee, a light tan jacket, and a dark blouse. Flyers were posted around the region, at bus stops, on bulletin boards, and in local shops. Notices also ran in regional newspapers and on local radio stations. Almost immediately, relatives got involved in the search. Amandine's brother, Rémi, became a driving force in the grassroots efforts. He took charge of organizing the flyer campaign, printing materials, mapping distribution routes, and enlisting friends and volunteers. There wasn't a single bulletin board in the area without his sister's photo. Just 2 days after Amandine's disappearance, on June 20th, her friends and loved ones launched a Facebook page titled Pour Amandine, Porque tu nous reviens, meaning, for Amandine, so that you come back to us. It quickly became a hub for coordination, used to distribute flyers, recruit volunteers, and post updates. People from the region, along with others moved by the case, began helping in various ways. Some took to putting up posters, while others participated in organized search efforts. Meanwhile, extensive ground searches were underway in the area around Amandine's home. Volunteers and officials combed through forests, fields, and the banks of the Agout River. The search zone included flatlands, rugged hills, old service buildings, and abandoned properties. Despite the scope of the effort, neither Amandine nor any of her belongings were recovered. Each passing day made it less likely that Amandine had left on her own. Her bank account hadn't been touched. There were no phone calls, no messages, nothing to suggest a voluntary disappearance. Everything pointed to something far more troubling, most likely a crime. In the early weeks, investigators explored several theories. The leading hypothesis soon became that Amandine's disappearance involved aggressive behavior from an outside party. Attention eventually turned to a company in Rocacorbe that owned a utility van similar to the one spotted outside Amandine's house. The uniforms worn by their workers also matched the description of the man seen walking into her home. One employee of the company stood out, a 25-year-old mason named Guerric Jehanno. He had grown up in the area and was familiar with many locals, including Amandine's brother, Remy. Garrick had previously worked cutting granite before taking a job at a small construction firm. His name didn't surface in the case until May of 2014, when his mother, Irma Jehanno, made an unexpected visit to the authorities. She shared growing concerns about her son's behavior. According to Irma, Garrick had repeatedly made strange comments like, "I'm not a criminal," and if they find blood in the van, it's from fish. He talked about odd smells he encountered while fishing or foraging for mushrooms, and insisted he could smell death. She said he had become increasingly paranoid, claiming people were watching him and hunting him down. He once described seeing someone in the woods with a shovel, but never reported it to police. It was unclear whether these were intrusive thoughts, delusions, or signs of emotional distress. After his mother's statement, Guerric Jehanno was brought in for questioning for the first time. In June of 2014, he was taken into custody for 48 hours. He denied having anything to do with Amandine's disappearance. According to internal company records, he had been assigned to work at a construction site in Rocacorbe on June 18th. At first, this seemed to give him a solid alibi. His supervisor and co-workers confirmed he'd been on site. However, during a follow-up with the company, new doubts emerged. A supervisor admitted that after delivering materials to a site near Amandine's home, the crew had roughly an hour and a half of unaccounted time. None of his colleagues could say for sure where Garrick had gone during that window. It was entirely possible that he used the company van to go near Amandine's house. That meant his whereabouts during the most critical part of the timeline were now uncertain. Corinne, the neighbor who had seen Amandine the day she disappeared, was asked to identify Guerric Jehanno. However, she couldn't provide a definitive answer. In a small town like Rocacorbe, she knew him by face, just as she knew many others. She did point out that the work pants Jehanno typically wore matched the clothing she remembered on the man that day. Still, because she had viewed the scene from her window and only from behind, no formal identification was made. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the mounting details made Guerric Jehanno the primary person of interest. Even though there was no direct proof linking him to the case, he became the first, and at that point, the only individual that investigators seriously considered connected to Amandine Estrabaud's disappearance. Not long after his questioning, Jehanno was released. There wasn't enough legal basis to keep him in custody. However, inconsistencies in the alibi provided by his employer called for further investigation. One concern was that Jehanno was reportedly scheduled to stop by another worksite in the Rocacorbe area, just a short distance from Amandine's home. That gave him a reasonable opportunity to move freely between locations and placed him near the scene during the critical time frame. Investigators also began exploring why Jehanno might have entered Amandine's home. At first glance, there didn't appear to be any strong personal connection between them, but several acquaintances recalled that Jehanno had expressed interest in her. One friend remembered him calling Amandine attractive and not hiding his feelings. Additionally, there had been a minor household issue in her home, a potential water infiltration problem in one of the rooms. Amandine had mentioned the issue to neighbors. It's possible she brought it up during a casual encounter, perhaps on the street or near her home, and Jehanno might have offered to help, citing his background in construction. This would explain his presence in her home without any sign of force. If she believed he could be helpful, she may not have seen him as a threat. Amandine's calm demeanor that day also supported the theory that she was at least vaguely familiar with the man. All of these elements led to the first working theory in the case. Jehanno might have used the situation as an opportunity to get closer to her, but something went very, very wrong. The motive, actions, and consequences were still unclear, but a coherent narrative was starting to form. By April of 2016, Jehanno was formally taken into custody and charged with abduction and unlawful confinement. But within weeks, a more serious charge was added: homicide. The reason? Testimonies from several inmates who had shared a cell block with Jehanno while he was in pretrial detention. According to them, Jehanno had voluntarily spoken about his involvement in Amandine's disappearance. One inmate claimed Jehanno described aggressive behavior of a sexual nature, followed by a fatal act. His account included details that hadn't been made public at the time, facts only someone directly involved could know. He allegedly admitted to disposing of the body and hiding the victim's personal belongings. One inmate reported this information to investigators, and it was recorded during a formal interview. These statements couldn't be dismissed. At that stage, there were no other known confessions in the case. Guerric Jehanno also handed over 2 hand-drawn diagrams. One depicted a location where, according to him, he had buried a body and covered it with lime. The second showed coordinates where Amandine's jewelry was supposedly hidden. Both sketches were labeled with her name. These documents sparked a large-scale search operation in the area he indicated. Over several weeks, search teams, including archaeologists from the National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research, or INRAP, combed through the rugged wooded region near the town of La Cruzette. The terrain was mountainous, with steep ravines, streambeds, and dense undergrowth. Ground-penetrating radar was used, along with detailed inspections of caves and natural pits. Despite the precise directions and extensive manpower, neither human remains nor personal items were discovered. After this, Jehanno reversed course. He claimed the sketches had nothing to do with Amandine's disappearance. Instead, he said they simply showed his favorite spots for fishing and mushroom hunting. As for her name being written on the pages, he claimed it was either an attempt to get people to leave him alone or a ploy to impress fellow inmates. His attorneys argued that he had deliberately crafted the image of being dangerous as a way to avoid conflict while in custody. While this backpedaling cast doubt on the reliability of his earlier claims, it didn't erase their legal weight. Investigators noted a crucial point. Jehanno had provided information that likely could have come only from someone with first-hand knowledge of the situation. This became a key argument for his potential involvement, even without a direct confession. The prosecution's case didn't rest on a single piece of evidence, but rather on a pattern of overlapping circumstantial details, his behavior, his statements, and facts that would have been hard for an outsider to know. More than 7 years passed after Amandine Estrabaud's disappearance before the case reached trial. The first hearing against Guerric Jehanno on charges of abduction, unlawful detention, and homicide began on October 8, 2020, in the Court of Assizes in Albi, the capital of the Tarn department. What made the case extraordinary was the complete absence of a body, a confession, DNA evidence, blood traces, or any definitive physical proof. Despite that, prosecutors argued that the existing circumstantial evidence was sufficient to bring the case before a jury. Included in the trial were contradictions in Jehanno's alibi and inconsistencies in his previous statements. Digital records added to the suspicions. On the night in question, his gaming console, which he used daily, was never turned on. He later claimed, "I just didn't play," though he had previously told investigators that he spent the evening playing PlayStation. That contradiction caught the attention of the prosecution. Jehanno's behavior in court drew mixed reactions. Reporters noted that he showed little interest in the proceedings, avoided looking at photos of Amandine, and didn't respond to emotional remarks from her mother. When asked what he felt while looking at her picture, Jehanno answered, "Nothing." This apparent indifference only reinforced perceptions of emotional distance and detachment. Some witnesses described him as a withdrawn person, prone to aggressive behavior when under the influence, traits that were officially entered into the court record. Guerric Jehanno never admitted guilt to any of the charges. His defense team insisted there was no direct evidence against him. They described the proceedings as a trial by speculation, claiming the case was based on conjecture, unverified inmate testimony, and circumstantial clues. Prosecutors countered that the consistent pattern of contradictions, the lack of a coherent alternative explanation, and Jehanno's behavior all pointed toward his involvement in a violent scenario. On October 14, 2020, the jury found Guerric Jehanno guilty of abducting, unlawfully detaining, and committing a fatal act against Amandine Estrabaud. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison to be served in a high-security facility. The court emphasized that even without the discovery of a body, the presented evidence formed a convincing and internally consistent narrative sufficient to reach a verdict. The decision made headlines and marked one of the rare occasions in French legal history when someone was convicted of a homicide without the victim's remains ever being found. After the initial conviction, Jehanno exercised his right to appeal. A second trial began on November 15, 2021, in the Appellate Court of Toulouse, located in the Haute-Garonne department. The charges and the defendant's position remained unchanged. The defense maintained a central theme: convicted without proof. One attorney even compared the case to other disappearances in the region, specifically the case of Delphine Jubilard, who vanished in December of 2020 under similarly mysterious circumstances. No trace, no body. The prosecution, however, restated its arguments. The focus remained on Jehanno's questionable alibi, his unaccounted movements during the key time window, his inconsistent statements, and his suspicious behavior following Amandine's disappearance. New details also emerged regarding his concerning online activity, highlighting a pattern of obsessive and troubling internet behavior, including viewing content with deviant themes. Prosecutors laid out a likely scenario. Jehanno offered Amandine a ride, possibly under the pretext of helping inspect her home after she had mentioned plumbing issues. Once inside, an incident occurred, possibly a confrontation following unwanted advances, which escalated and ended fatally. Defense lawyers denied this version, pointing out that no one saw him leaving the house and there was no physical evidence of aggression. On November 19, 2021, the appellate court upheld the original verdict. Jehanno was again found guilty. But contrary to the Estrabaud family's hopes, the 2021 ruling wasn't the final chapter. In 2022, the Court of Cassation overturned the decision due to a procedural error. One required legal phrase was missing from the court's written justification. Though the omission was technical, it triggered a mandatory retrial. The third trial took place in January of 2024 in Montauban, located in the Tarn-et-Garonne department. The prosecution again presented the same sequence of arguments, asserting that the cumulative weight of circumstantial indicators justified a guilty verdict. The case once more relied on Jehanno's inmate statements, his hand-drawn diagrams, and behavioral inconsistencies from earlier proceedings. The defense team focused on distancing Guerric Jehanno from the scene of the crime and maintained that he had no involvement whatsoever. Jehanno, who had turned 35 by the time of the hearings, once again denied all charges. In a surprising twist, his mother Irma Jehanno changed her story, claiming she never said the things attributed to her in the official records. This sudden reversal caused a strong reaction from both the court and the prosecution, as her original statements had played a key role in launching the investigation. Despite efforts by the defense to dismantle the central elements of the case, they were unsuccessful. On January 26, 2024, Guerric Jehanno was found guilty for the third time on charges of abduction, unlawful detention, and committing a fatal act against Amandine Estrabaud. He was once again sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, the Court of Cassation rejected his final appeal, confirming the verdict as legally binding. 3 convictions in one case, without a body, without a confession, and without direct physical evidence, made the trial over Amandine Estrabaud's disappearance one of the most unique and controversial in the history of French justice. Public opinion was deeply divided. Some viewed the verdict as fair and necessary, while others felt it was based on too much uncertainty. Legal experts emphasized that the conviction relied on the principle of a faciu dendices graves, précis et concordance, a legal framework where multiple separate facts, each insufficient on their own, collectively form a strong basis for a guilty verdict. This is fully legal under French law, but it inevitably raises a difficult question. How much doubt is too much doubt? Thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and share to help grow the channel. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.